include strategies such as the introduction of technology in the form of biometric card containing a microchip and a smart card reader, gendered policy, and that of physically challenged persons, meant to deepen the nation's democracy and ensure that truly votes count.
And in spite of these measures, Kinsley, new forms of electoral malpractices also came up in the recent elections conducted by INEC.
That's right. The latest of such infractions include vote buying, popularly referred to as see and buy. There have also been logistic deficiencies and other forms of voter inducement, as well as security and safety of personnel. Now, there's also the issue of diaspora voting and electronic voting, pre-election and post-election anomalies.
You're right, Kinsley. But the Electoral Management Body has taken another step to ensure integrity of the votes by introducing INEC Results Viewing Center, that is IREV, and then from polling units which was used in the Edo and Ondo state governorship elections recently.
That's right, Nadabo, but all of these efforts remain inadequate, according to some experts, as Nigerians are still calling for more electoral reforms before the next general elections. This, of course, is to ensure that democracy is more inclusive and participatory, particularly also for those in the diaspora, the vulnerable and less privileged citizens. So, what areas should be strengthened in terms of electoral reforms, and what types of technology should be introduced to further ensure that the electoral process is credible, free and fair? And how soon can the country begin electronic voting? These are some of the issues we intend to focus on as we examine electoral reforms on today's edition of Good Morning Nigeria. I'm Kingsley Osadolo, and I welcome you to the program.
And I'm Yusuf Nadabo Sumani. Also welcome you to Good Morning Nigeria today, reaching you live on the network service of the NTA. As usual, we have our complimentary segments, including the newspaper review, business news, and others. For a start, let's join Tessie Omeri for the morning news highlights. Good morning, Tessie.
Hi, good morning and welcome to the morning news. Vice President Yemi Osibanjo says Nigeria is emerging stronger from the economic recession and expressed confidence in ongoing efforts to address factors responsible for the hyperinflation recently recorded by the country. Speaking at the opening of the 26th session of the Nigeria Economic Summit tagged Building Partnerships for Resilience, the Vice President said the economic sustainability plan is private-led with a view to returning the economy on the path of sustained positive growth.
To take the example of agriculture, with the support of the banking sector, the federal government is working to organize finance for farmers, and we're also guaranteeing uptake of the produce. This is the mass agriculture program which the federal government has undertaken.
The Federal Inland Revenue Service is deploying technological infrastructure to drive tax collection processes across the country and create friendly network system for enhancing public confidence in its operations. This strategic innovation came to the fore at a media briefing to keep Nigerians in tune with the activities of the service on the 2020 tax projection benchmark.
From January to date, total revenue contributed to FAC by the four agencies responsible, which is NNPC, GPR, Nigeria Consumer Assembly, stood at 6.1 trillion naira. And out of this 6.1 trillion, 3.8 trillion came from FRS, that is 63% of the money.
The Federal High Court sitting in Abuja has ordered that the APC senator representing Borno South in the National Assembly, Ali Ndume, be remanded in Kuje Correctional Center for his failure to produce the former chairman of the defunct pension reform tax team, Abdul Rashid Maina, as his surety. Justice Okona Abang delivered the ruling on Monday in the case of alleged fraud and money laundering preferred against him by the EFCC. Abdul Rashid Maina has repeatedly failed to appear in court for continuation of his trial.
Prison, and he has given us instructions to test the matter on appeal. We will so test it on appeal.
The National Assembly is set to reconvene today, plenary today. The National Assembly has suspended plenary in both chambers to enable standing committees focus on the 2021 budget defense.
We have several reports from the Committee on Tertiary Institutions and Third Fund for second readings and approvals, final readings for some of those institutions. So we'll be taking a look at that. PIBB will be our priority. I'm hoping that very, very soon we'll start paying strong attention.
We're also going to look at the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, the Transportation Bill, the Health Insurance Amendment Bill.
Information and Culture Minister Lai Mohammed has assured the government of Nasarawa State that his ministry will collaborate with the state in developing its tourism sector. The minister stated this when he granted audience to the Deputy Governor of Nasarawa State, Dr. Emmanuel Agbado Akabe, in Abuja.
The truth of the matter is that we can avoid a lot of youth restlessness, protests, if we take advantage of tourism.
So we're here to seek the assistance of the Honourable Minister, the Ministry, and indeed the federal government to assist us.
Nigeria's rich culture and tourism potentials is moving into the new hub of economic resource that will accelerate development of the country. This is the consensus of dignitaries at the opening of the 2020 edition of National Festival of Arts and Culture holding in Jos, Plateau State.
Hosting this event in Plateau State is also another confirmation of the restored confidence that the people have in our state with the restoration of peace.
The presence of all the contingents from the 36 states signifies hope, signifies unity.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, with the beauty and glamour we saw today, is there any reason Nigeria should disagree?
The Presidential Task Force on COVID-19 has advised Nigerians to suspend plans to travel for the Yuletide in order to prevent a surge in community transmission of COVID-19. PTF Chairman Boss Mustafa at Monday's national briefing says only essential travel should be cautiously undertaken.
If it's not essential, just stay home.
You may ask, what is essential travel? Essential travel is if you have to travel for study, work purposes.
All this is to reduce the risk of COVID importation to a minimum.
Nigeria Center for Disease Control has announced 56 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 in the country. Among the 10 states that recorded new cases, Kaduna tops the list with 18 cases, followed by FCT with 17, then Lagos, which has 6. Other states are Plateau 5, Kano 3, Kwara and Yobe have 2 new cases each, while Ekiti, Niger and Rivers have 1 confirmed case each. With this, Nigeria has 66,439 confirmed cases of COVID-19, out of which 62,241 were treated and discharged, while 1,168 deaths recorded. And that concludes the morning news highlights. Good Morning Nigeria continues with Kingsley and Nadabo after this break.
A scorecard like no other. Government has put in place measures and initiatives principally targeted at youths, women, and the most vulnerable groups in our society. These included broad plan to lift 100 million Nigerians out of poverty in the next 10 years. The creation of 75 billion naira National Youth Investment Fund to provide opportunities for the youths, and the Micro, Small and Medium Enterprises Survivor Fund, through which government is A. Paying 3-month salaries of the staff of 100,000 micro, small and medium enterprises. B. Paying for the registration of 250,000 businesses at the Corporate Affairs Commission. C. Giving a grant of 30,000 naira to 100,000 artisans and guaranteeing market for the product of traders. These are in addition to many other initiatives such as farmer money, trader money, market money, N-Power, N-Tech, and N-Agro. These and more in spite of a recession and a global pandemic.
Do you know that social media is not good or bad, and that it is you who is using it that is either good or bad? Bad social media users spread rumors and fake news without verification. But good social media users stop, verify the information, and reflect before sharing it. Now, are you a good social media user? Stop the spread of fake news. Verify the authenticity of your source for a better Nigeria.
This message is from the National Orientation Agency.
Hi. I'm done. Really? Yes.
There's an easier way to get more data. Get more out of life with the new Airtel data plans. Dial *141# now. Data is life.
Airtel, the smartphone network. The counsel of our fathers.
My advice to these young people is please do not take us back to those harrowing days. You probably do not know what it is.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you from the studios of the Nigerian Television Authority. This morning we're discussing electoral reforms in Nigeria. The federal government assures Nigerians that the economic sustainability plan will cushion effects of recent GDP contraction. Now let's join Kunle Adeyeye for details on business news for a start.
The National Bureau of Statistics in its latest report revealed that Nigeria's real GDP contracted by minus 3.62% in the third quarter of 2020 against minus 6.10% in the second quarter. Consequently, the cumulative GDP for the first 9 months of the year is now minus 2.48%. This has compelled many citizens to conclude that Nigeria's economy is fragile. Speaking on the sidelines of the Nigeria Economic Summit, Minister of State, Budget and National Planning, Clem Agba, said there should be no cause for alarm. He emphasized that various programs and policies of government, principally the Economic Sustainability Plan, will absorb the shocks of the contraction.
If you look at the quarter-on-quarter GDP, this is the best that we have had in the last 7 years. It's a positive growth of 12.1%. So Nigerians need not despair. We are doing all that we can to ensure that the economic sustainability plan is well implemented and that we are going to have just a V-shaped recession. It means just a shallow recession and a quick recovery.
He also hinted that concerned stakeholders will be meeting regularly to review the situation. And to the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange, let's see how tradings went on the first day of the week, November 23, 2020. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
Many thanks, Kunle, for the business package. Coming up next is newspaper review.
Now, Bayo Atebe, good morning. Good morning, Nigeria newspaper reviewer is here. Bayo, welcome. Good morning.
Thank you, Yusuf. Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, Kinsley. Good morning, Nigeria.
Hi, Bayo. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Where we have two papers this morning, the Daily Trust and the Nation. Let's begin by taking a look at the Nation newspaper. Above the nameplate says 20 killed as yellow fever hits Benue. 3 councils affected. 20 killed as yellow fever hits Benue. 3 councils affected. MENA, court sends Senator Undume to prison. That's page 10. With a rider, let Abaribe go to jail. How AMCON misled court, and that's according to Jimo Ibrahim, as Inspector General promotes 82,779 policemen to next rank. Below the nameplate, FIRS rakes in 4.178 trillion naira from taxes. That's page 11. And on page 8, petrol subsidy not completely gone, says Minister. Travel policy for review over surge in global COVID-19 cases. With the rider, many incoming passengers presenting fake virus-free certificate. The lead story says how we will take Nigeria out of recession by government, and measures lined up by president. Minimum wage earners won't pay tax. These are 12 riders. You can see further details on page 5, with of course starting on the front page. Right at the foot of the front page, 22 states and FCT in Plateau for NAFEST. Fintri, that's the governor of Adamawa, presents 140 billion naira budget plan. So, back again to xenophobia. That's the photograph there on the front page of the Nation newspaper. Marching against foreigners, hundreds of truck drivers protesting on the South African city of Durban to demand truck driving job opportunities currently in favor of foreigners in their country. That took place yesterday in Durban.
Yeah.
Honorable.
Okay. Thanks, Kinsley. I have the Daily Trust here, and then right under the mast we have 3 stories. One on page 6, which goes as follows. 2021 budget can't take Nigeria out of recession, according to the members of the House of Reps. And then on page 4, there's a story, 138 core members test positive for coronavirus. And then we have World Bank says Nigeria's per capita income worst in 40 years. Details on page 16. At the bottom of the page, you have NSAS, ex-UK minister seeks sanctions on Nigerian officials. Get the details on page 6. Then we also have a story on page 16, which goes as follows. FG directs NDAs to buy only local automobiles. On page 4, FIRS generates 4.178 trillion in 10 months. And then the big story, or the main story on the Daily Trust here is minor. Ndumi passes night in prison, files appeal today. And the writer that says constituents scold ex-pension boss for betrayal. Get the story on page 5. Another story right here is gunmen on the prowl abduct Agric minister's brother. ABU lecturer says on page 3 is the details. Let's see what's up there. On page 3, there is a picture of some suspected kidnappers here. And then the writer here says, invade ABU's area, kidnap lecturer, and then abduct minister's brother, pick doctor in Kogi, priest in Abuja, father, son slaughtered in Kano. That's as gunmen go on prowl. This is a very serious story.
Yes, it's very serious. In the case of the Ahmadu Bello University, gunmen were reported to have invaded Ahmadu Bello University's Samaru Zaria and adopted a staff. The gunmen invaded the house of the staff around 12:50 a.m. He and his wife and daughter were taken along. However, the campus security were very smart, and they called in the intelligence response team of the police, and the police came in, and in the process of them putting pressure on them in the gun exchange, they let go the daughter and the wife and took the man away. You also will recall that just on November 17th, I think it was, Nuhu Bamali Polytechnic on the outskirts of Zaria was also saw his staff, the head of the department of computer science, was also abducted with 2 other children. The good news is that they have now been released. These incidences are on the increase, and it becomes a big challenge for security agencies. Now, the other dominant story is the issue about the economy. The Nigeria Bureau of Statistics gave the latest details and said that the gross domestic product of Nigeria grew about 3.62% for the third quarter running. So with the drop of about 3.62%, that means that it's the second time that the economy, the gross domestic product was dropping, following the drop of 6.1% in the second quarter of 2020. Nigeria has slipped into a second recession in 4 years. We were in recession in 2016 and we were able to come out of it. But the Nigerian economy, like any around the world, suffered from the global pandemic. Before the pandemic, the Nigerian economy was actually projected to grow by about 2.1% in the year 2020. So we had a combination of factors like the COVID-19, the OPEC oil cuts, and the foreign exchange liquidity, and they all impacted so heavily on the Nigerian economy. Nigeria per capita income, which rose from $1.968 to $2.2229 in 2019, has also plummeted. Border closure and the pandemic raised the cost of living, and inflation is now at 14.25%. But the World Bank has its forecast, and they have forecast that the economy generally for the year 2020 for Nigeria will drop to about the suffer 3.2% decline. The International Monetary Fund, they have projected 4.3% decline for the Nigerian economy. However, by the year 2021, the IMF expect that Nigeria economy will get a rebound of about 2.6%. The World Bank had forecast a gross domestic product of about 0.36 in 2021 for Nigeria. The expectation to exit from this recession is put about second quarter of 2021. Meanwhile, at a virtual participation of Nigeria Economic Summit Group yesterday, President Muhammadu Buhari said that the severity of global economic downturn occasioned by the pandemic is the major cause of the Nigerian economy now in recession. But however, the president highlighted measures that have been put in place to try and remedy the situation as quickly as possible. There is a 15 trillion infrastructure fund to be independently managed. And there's also the finance bill of 2020. Kingsley, you remember we were talking about the finance bill, why it was tagged Finance Bill 2020.
Yeah, that's the short title.
Yes. So it's a big provision for minimum wage earners to be exempted from personal income tax. There's also going to be, there has been tax break for small scale businesses that started since last year. The intention is to stimulate growth and reduce the impact of inflation on the ordinary Nigerians. The president stressed we must persist in diversifying our economy and to enable the private sector play the major role in resilience and making our economy competitive, and also having the ability to withstand exogenous shock. Our journey to economic prosperity, he says, is a long out, but we must all continue to foster on. On the issue of COVID-19, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control says they tested 34,785 core members around camps around the country. 138 of them were found to have tested positive. And the measures they took is that to make sure that out of the 138, none of them were allowed to enter the camps. But they are either to be managed at home or to be treated as a COVID-19 center, depending upon the severity of their symptoms and the level of the infection. Meanwhile, Nigeria COVID-19 continued to record reduced cases. Last week, that is 15 November to 21st, we had 1,232 new cases. The infections were recorded from 27,399 samples. Since February that COVID-19 has visited us, where Nigerians have tested 743,298. So far, we have had 66,439 cases. Our competitors that have been discharged from COVID-19 are 62,241. Presently, unfortunately, we have lost 1,168 of our compatriots, and 3,030 people are currently under treatment. Yesterday, there were only 56 cases in 10 states of the Federation.
Okay, Bayo, I think we have just Nadabo, a couple of minutes before we wrap up this session. But what is happening to Senator Ali Udume is indicative of the seriousness of standing shorty to a defendant in a criminal trial. Sometimes people assume that this thing is for the fun of it. I do know that in some cities, particularly in the magistrates' courts, there are persons who make a job of being professional shorties to defendants, as I now call in the past. Previously, they were referred to as accused persons. So, assuming Bayo, you were charged before a court, so I didn't know you from Adam, but I could then, for a fee, stand shorty for you. That's to say that I will guarantee that on each of the court appearances, day of appearances, that you will be available to defend your case, and so on and so forth. So, if you don't jump bail, the penalty, of course, falls on me. But sometimes it turns out that some of those persons, their identities are not known. Those who stand shorties, their identities are not quite known. But some of the court officials are also said to know those professional shorties very well. And so they, yes, well, no, charge and bail shorties now, not charge and bail persons. So it's a very serious matter, when you are standing shorty. And sometimes when you see the conditions of bail specified by a judge, you would say, look, you have to have a property of so much value, you have to have a director in the Federal Civil Service or a senator or a member of the House of Reps. It takes quite a while before those conditions are met. Yeah, sure. Yes, and before those conditions are met, of course, the person remains in prison custody. So, what manner is, Ndume is going to the Court of Appeal to quash the court order to say, look, now call in the bond, because 500 million naira is no small amount of money. Yes. Yeah, so
sure, that's what he's up to today, really. That's what he says he's going to do. But it seems as if Minor has really betrayed, the trust. And then, of course, just like his compatriots are saying, the townsmen of Ndume are saying that Minor really failed their senator.
Well, the law will take its course. Meanwhile, let's look at the human interest. So you recall last Thursday the incident about the vendor who was shot. Today at plenary, the House of Representatives is likely to give recognition to the vendor. The Speaker of the House of Representatives says he's been mourning since Thursday. He in fact visited the Association of Nigerian Vendors over the weekend, and he has also visited the family of Ifeanyi Okereke, who was shot. Ifeanyi Okereke, by some strange coincidence, was expected to resume from his employment in the Ministry of Labour before, unfortunately, he was shot and killed. But the Speaker was very magnanimous. He visited the family, and he said the children of the late Okereke has now become his children. He has established an endowment fund for the Okereke children, and he says he will take care of them until they reach age 21.
Yeah, he left behind 9 days old baby too.
Yes, that's a 9 days old child. Yes.
Yeah, most unfortunate what happened, but the prompt steps taken by the Speaker are to be commended, including the information that came out. You recall we were discussing it on Good Morning Nigeria that day, shortly after we wrapped up the newspaper review segment, because there was some confusion as to who fired the shot. Paper reporting in his photo caption was the police. In the meantime, there was also in the body of the story that the DPO, the Federal Secretariat, assisted the victim to go to the hospital. The police commissioner of the FCT, Palachurum, of course, sent in some communication through our producer, and we quickly put that out. And it's turned out now that it was another security aide, namely a DSS official who did this. The greater issue to actually contemplate, quite aside from the moves already made by the Speaker for succor for the family of the deceased, is, look, what many uniform refer to as finger discipline. What would make a security aid to start firing. There must be a sufficient threat. Now, somebody would argue, oh, you saw what happened after the NSAS. But before the NSAS, we had also seen similar things. It is not in all cases that a principal is under threat, and the next thing, sometimes they say they are shooting to scare, but what would cause that? Because the gentleman was shot in the head. And I think they said 3 shots or so. So those are some of the issues that our officers, particularly those who bear arms, would need to undergo some further training.
Yeah,
so when do you release a shot? And why?
Mentioning 3 shots even is damn too much. No matter
Absolutely.
what the case is. Could have been 1 or whatever, and then there should be a specified area such shots should be aimed at. But all the same, the guy is gone, and we hope and pray that he rests well wherever he is, and commend the House of Reps member for what he's done with it.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. Well, the other issue about the travel policy for review, you recall we had expressed some concern as to our capacity to effectively monitor travelers coming from outside.
Abroad, yes. And
you have seen inbound travelers now, there are claims that some of them are presenting fake COVID-19 free certificates. How do you ascertain? And those who are supposed to have arrived and therefore gone for further testing are not even doing so. So what happens? Everybody just mingling in the population.
So if they had a fake test certificate, how were they able to escape abroad before they arrived in Nigeria?
Well, suppose the country from where they are departing doesn't require you to have a COVID-19 certificate before you leave their shores. Suppose.
But then because you required that certificate of entry, then they go and seek
precisely before at the point of arrival. So you go and do that. Well, we can't reduce everything to luck, but we have been lucky.
I think whatever it is, the people should keep to the protocols and then take responsibility.
That's right.
Bayo, thank you so much for appearing on this program this morning.
Thank you.
Hope and see you tomorrow again. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We'll be back after this break with more on the program. Stay with us.
The counsel of our fathers.
I will urge and advise our younger generation to use talent and brain to sort out problems, not arms.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
Hello, madam. Would you like to join us on this mission?
Yes, but how?
Just one question for you. How do you keep your toilet clean?
I use regular detergent and bleach for washing and removing yellow stains. I have been using it for years.
Oh, madam, the regular detergents and bleach are used for washing clothes.
To disinfect your toilet properly, you need Harpic 10X. It is specially made for germs and stains remover. Harpic sticker formula settles on stains and gives 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergent and bleach.
Wow, now I'm convinced, Helen Paul.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that she's part of the mission, the next house is yours.
These days, people get their news and information from more media sources than ever before. Some of the news and information given are fake, unverified, doctored, and manufactured to create confusion, stir disaffection, and cause disunity. Before you believe or share any news, ask yourself, is this real? Is it from a credible source? Is it verified or verifiable? Fake news is dangerous. Whether you do it for fun or for political gains, real people can get hurt. Fake news, don't create it, don't spread it.
This is a public service announcement from NTA.
Our topic this morning is electoral reforms in Nigeria. And the clamor for credibility, integrity, free and fair elections in Nigeria necessitates the need for electoral reforms in the country. And then correspondent Victor Ezo put together this background report to serve as prompt for our discussion this morning.
It's a long history of electoral reforms in Nigeria, dating back to the different political transition processes since independence. Each transition program witnessed the creation of a new electoral commission, with INEC established in 1998 as part of the transition program that ushered in the Fourth Republic. Subsequent electoral reforms have largely enjoyed the input of INEC and the National Assembly, among others. Yet, with each election comes renewed calls for further reforms. In recent times, calls for electoral reform have included notably establishment of a special electoral offences tribunal, financial autonomy for INEC, legal recognition for electronic voting and other related matters, greater control for INEC over activities of political parties, and issues around judicial determination of electoral matters, among others. In the meantime, the Senate has already concluded receipt of memoranda, while the House is still open to receiving memoranda on electoral reform as part of the proposed constitutional amendment. So, what might Nigerians expect from the next electoral reform? How will the reform improve the integrity of Nigeria's electoral system? Will the reform be accomplished ahead of the 2023 general elections? These are some of the details that guests on Good Morning Nigeria will be expected to provide.
All right, many thanks, Azu, for that backgrounder. With us in the studios this morning, we would like to welcome two regular guests on Good Morning Nigeria. First, Professor Osareme Osumbo, Professor of Law and former Governor of Edo State, also former Chairman, Nigerian Law Reform Commission, and two-term Senator, 1999 to 2007. Your Excellency, pleasure to have you on Good Morning Nigeria.
It's my pleasure. Good morning.
Also here with us in the studios, we would like to welcome Cynthia Mbamalo. She is Director of Programs of Yaga Africa. Cynthia, delighted to have you with us on Good Morning Nigeria.
Thank you. Good morning.
Okay. And joining us from Yenagoa through Zoom is Festus Okoye, National Commissioner of Information and Voter Education, INEC. And good to have you on the program, Mr. Okoye.
Good morning.
Okay, Mr. Festus Okoye, we might as well begin with you because we know we have to let you go for other assignments in another 30 minutes or so. But let's begin. I mean, here we are. This is 2020 already coming to a close. In 2019, when we had the last general elections, we recall that there were moves to amend the Electoral Act and also tinker with other aspects of the Constitution relating to elections and electioneering. But there were all kinds of arguments that came up, and I'm sure that you remember some of the popular arguments that, oh, there's a certain model law prescribed by ECOWAS which says that member states shouldn't embark on critical electoral reforms less than 6 months to a general election because there might not have been sufficient time to test it. I'm laying all of this background against the fact that, look, we've virtually done another 2 years, and before we know it, the 2023 elections will be upon us. Are we on the path to having additional electoral reforms? And if so, what is it that INEC would like to see as part of the reform agenda? Well, it looks like we've lost Festus in the meantime. These things come and go with our tech. I just hope that once the link is reestablished, then we'll be in a better position to get that on. But before he comes back, let's talk about some historical perspective. Cynthia, I know that you have quite an encyclopedia on what kind of reforms you would like to see. But Professor Osareme Osumbo, I mean, you were a senator from 1999 to 2007. And the issue of electoral reforms has always been a contentious one, not less so when you were a senator. We recall the yin and yang over the Electoral Act 2001, yin and yang over Electoral Act 2002. But eventually, we were able to get by, and then we had the 2003 elections, contentious in many ways and in many respects. But from your point of view, what is it that we need to do to tweak our electoral system, to tweak our electoral acts so that we can deliver on more credible, free and fair elections?
Well, first of all, let me say that as society is dynamic, so its laws should also be dynamic, and changes effected from time to time to reflect the new understanding and the new realities of the day. And looking at the historical perspective, as you said, even before the advent of this current dispensation, democratic dispensation, in the past we had series of electoral acts that governed elections during those periods. Talking here about First Republic, Second Republic. But in the current democratic dispensation, when we came in 1999, INEC then proposed a draft electoral act. And I was privileged. I was the very first chairman of the Senate Committee on INEC. And I had the privilege of driving that process, which led to the passing of the Electoral Act of 2001 that you refer to. There were a lot of concerns by INEC then, which informed some of the provisions there. For instance, that we should not have too many political parties, proliferation of parties. You talked about the controversy. And one of the things we did then was to try and set certain benchmarks that have to be attained before a political association is registered as a political party. And a lot of provisions around this. But as you will recall, the Supreme Court invalidated many of those provisions that in the formation of political parties, we were not entitled to go beyond the prescriptions of the Constitution. And a number of other provisions there, which the Supreme Court said were a duplication of provisions of the Constitution. Again, we learned from that and tried to correct that in the 2002 Electoral Act. But the main controversy about the 2002 Electoral Act, if you remember, INEC said they couldn't conduct all elections in one day. But the sentiment, the politics of the National Assembly at that time was that all elections should be conducted in one day in order that governors, because many senators were afraid or concerned about the tendencies of their governors, and even the president. So their option, their preference was that all elections should be conducted in one day. As chairman of the Senate Committee on INEC, I knew that we couldn't do that because INEC, the body organizing the elections, have come out to say they cannot do all these things in one day. So it was wrong for anybody to force them to do what they have come out publicly to say they are incapable of doing. In fact, when it came to voting, I voted against the provision. And I recall a senator say, he has lost his chairmanship position because I went against the sentiment of my colleagues in the Senate. And that did happen. I lost the chairmanship of INEC on account of that. But I was vindicated in the end because the Supreme Court also invalidated it. And we managed to do the 2003 elections in spite of the deficiencies in the 2002 Electoral Act. What I'm saying, looking at the history, is that of course, there have been several amendments of the Electoral Act since then, and each amendment exercise takes into account the lessons learned in the just concluded election. So we've been trying to perfect the system. We also started with manual electoral voters register, if you recall. But during our time, we introduced electronic registration, not electronic voting, because again, the sentiment then was no, we cannot do electronic voting, but we did electronic registration, and everybody will now agree that it is tidier. The voters register now, done electronically, is better, tidier, more credible than the manual voters register that we used to have before. So these are just illustrations of how we have tried to improve on the Electoral Act with each successive election. And it is not enough to amend the Electoral Act. There are also certain very important provisions of the Constitution that are even superior to the provisions of the Electoral Act. So it is necessary to also talk about provisions of the Constitution having a bearing on credible.
We'll really talk about the relationship between the reform and the Constitution as we move on in the program. But let's get back to Festus Okoye, National Commissioner of Information and Voter Education. INEC, earlier we started with you. Unfortunately, we lost you, and then you're now back. Let's get back to you and then see what justice will make to Kinsley's earlier question that given the scenario recently, and of course looking at the history of reforms in this country and the rest of them, how inadequate have these reforms been, and what's the agenda in INEC, or exactly what is it? Is it necessary to have the reforms, and what is it there in, on the agenda for INEC?
Well, I agree with Professor Sumbo that society is dynamic, and as society moves, every rational society, every rational state must move with the dynamics of the society, and also bring its laws into conformity with the new realities on ground. So to that particular extent, it is very important for laws to also mirror the dynamics of the society. But on the other hand, I also believe that when we want to do reforms, we must do reforms holistically. We cannot be fixated on reforms or become those forms. I believe that there are certain issues and certain matters that have already been settled by the Supreme Court, for instance, and that some of those key issues that have been settled and are taken as given should no longer form part of the reform process. So I don't believe that every assembly must engage in electoral reform, and that is why when we had a meeting with the Senate Committee on INEC and the House Committee on Electoral Matters in Lagos sometime in March, we insisted that it is important for us to have best those to the electoral process, those reforms that are fundamental to conducting credible elections, and then amend the Electoral Act or reenact the Electoral Act so that at the end of the day, we will have an Electoral Act that everybody will be proud of. So to that particular extent, the Commission has made far-reaching comments on the bill for an act to amend the Electoral Act 2010. And we have also forwarded some of the that are also looked at some of the provisions of the Constitution that have a bearing on the electoral framework. And we have also proposed amendments to some of those provisions, so that at the end, we will have a very robust electoral act and a good constitutional framework to conduct elections, taking into consideration the fact that the society is moving and that most of the issues and most of the processes are now done electronically. So we want to align the Electoral Act and the Constitution to the new realities on ground, and also to the dynamics of the movement of the society and our electoral process, and also get our electoral process to conform to both regional and international standards. And that's exactly what we're doing.
Mr. Okoye, two issues that you have raised, that fine. INEC has made representation to the lawmakers not to seek to reopen matters that have been settled by the Supreme Court. So what are some of those matters? And then you also say that the focus should be on fundamental reforms. Could you cite some examples of what you refer to as fundamental reforms?
Well, one of those things we have proposed is an amendment to Section 52 of the Electoral Act to give the Commission the leeway and the window to introduce electronic voting machines or any other method of voting that the Commission wants to introduce for the time being. be done, it will enable us to introduce various innovations and also be very, very creative, because technology is dynamic, and the technology that is invoked today may not be the technology that will be invoked tomorrow. So what we are trying to do is to make sure that we don't write into the law, or that the lawmakers don't write into the law a particular form of technological solution which may become obsolete tomorrow. So that's one of the reforms we have proposed, an amendment to the to Section 52 of the Electoral Act.
Oh, Shep, once again, we appear to have lost him, but we'll return to him to deal with those issues. Notable, we have Cynthia Mbamalo here with us. Cynthia, I've been listening to the other guests. What is the slate of issues that YAGA has for electoral reforms?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning. It's just interesting listening to distinguished here and one-time governor, because it's always good to understand the historical development of our electoral law and the fact that we have tried at different points in time to reform the laws. So for us as YAGA Africa, not just as YAGA Africa, but also as Nigerians, is also asking ourselves at this moment of reforms, what issues do we want to see in the laws? And can we go back to previous proposals that have been made? We had the Uwais Committee. Not all the proposals from that committee were implemented. We also had recommendations from the Namani-led committee that are still yet to be implemented. And also some from the Sheikh Lemu, remember the committee that was set up on electoral violence. Now, they propose very important provisions that if we had adopted earlier, most of the challenges that we have in the electoral process wouldn't be experienced now. So if we want to look at issues to look around the electoral reform, Barrister Festus Okoye had already started with deployment of using technology, or deploying technology in elections management. Now that is important because if you look at our current realities, we need to make laws that respond to our current realities. And while technology aids transparency in the process, the idea is if you empower INEC to deploy technology, be it at the point of voting or result collation and transmission, which we believe should be something that INEC can deploy at those levels. The idea is that introduction of technology would serve as a complementary role to even the manual process to provide a more transparent system where citizens can follow through. And the lack of that empowerment in the electoral act for INEC has been a major challenge. So even the smart card reader, you see, we follow previous litigations in court. Whenever questions are raised on the data from the smart card reader, the court would always put the law as in the hierarchy of laws, put the electoral as to supersede the INEC's policy or guidelines on elections. So the legality of the smart card reader always comes to question when we go to court. But if you amend the Electoral Act to empower INEC to deploy technology, all of these issues would be reviewed. And we've seen the improvement in the process. If you look at the results collation process, for instance, we've seen that transmission of results can actually promote integrity in the process. In Edo and Ondo, we saw INEC upload results from polling units, and citizens could follow that on the INEC's platform to see how every result is uploaded from each polling unit. So that is one, deploying technology, especially because a lot of young people are also saying, why not have more technology in the process? That way we also would have confidence in the process. So beyond technology and elections management, I think another critical issue is around political candidate nomination, and that is because I think before in the 2019 election, I remember we had a conversation in this studio around party primaries and the challenges with a party primary system that is fraught with a lot of issues that would raise questions on credibility. And I believe one of the proposals is looking at that sections 87 of the Electoral Act. Now, why is that important? Reviewing the regulation on how parties primaries are conducted when it comes to indirect primaries and both direct primaries. So provisions around providing specifically in the Electoral Act ad hoc, both provisions around ad hoc and statutory delegates, the means of the election and selection of these delegates, and the conduct of the primaries, and then the legal regime around direct primaries, because you also want to ensure that direct primaries inspires confidence in the contestants within the primaries. So questions around credible and updated voter register of members of parties at the venues, questions around location, venues, and timing of those of party primaries communicated to all aspirants, and also looking at ensuring that for every conduct of primaries there is no issue of consensus candidates. It's either direct or indirect, and that parties strictly adhere to that. So candidate nomination is key, and around that also, that section 87 is also consideration around cost of nomination, because the more money determines or influences elections the way it does, the greater threat to credibility of the process. And there's a proposal for a specific benchmark on how much parties can charge aspirants to contest for specific offices within the primaries. So even I know there's a bill, I think that was proposed in the Senate, of Omo Agege's bill at the Senate level. But also part of our proposal is, can we consider putting that for contesting for presidency, for instance, nomination fees should not exceed 5 million, for instance. We are proposing 5 million. I know Senator Omo Agege is proposing 10 million. But also once you start from president, you reduce that. That way parties would no longer charge exorbitant fees to aspirants. And what that does, it serves a lot of challenges, solves a lot of challenges. One, it opens up the space for diverse voices like women and young people to also contest on equal footing. It also reduces the tendency for political actors to want to steal and embezzle just to contest in the primaries. So those particular provisions are very important. And I think one key one is that power of returning officer. If you remember cases, I think it was the Imo scenario where a returning officer makes a statement declaring under duress. Yet, INEC, the only authority that can overturn the decision of the returning officer in declaring an election winner is the court. So what that has done, it has created a lot of evils within the system. Now, the power of the returning officer is not subject to any form of oversight. That once a declaration is made, only the courts can overturn that. Okay. And that is increasing the role the court is playing in our electoral process.
Right, Cynthia, you have so much really to talk about on this agenda and what you're trying to really put across. I know the women issue is going to be there, the underprivileged are going to be there, and the rest of them. Soon. We'll get back to you much later in the program. Let's get back to Festus Okoye and then get to know exactly your expansion or your explanation on the Section 50 you were talking about much earlier. And then maybe summarily tell us what is in it and what really you want done about that. And of course, what the other silent features are, which you sent as part of the bill to the Senate.
Well, as I pointed out, we made parity recommendations relating to the deepening of the use of technology in the electoral process. We have also made recommendations, as Cynthia pointed out, relating to the provisions of Section 68 of the Electoral Act. And we are insisting as a commission that collation officers are appointed by the commission, and fundamentally they are answerable to the commission. And that when a collation officer has made a declaration under duress or has not made a declaration voluntarily, that the commission should be given the power or the leeway to review that particular declaration or within a reasonable time, and then to do what is right in the circumstance. If a declaration was made under duress, as far as we are concerned, it's not a declaration. If a declaration was not made voluntarily, it cannot be said to be a declaration as contemplated by Section 68 and 75 of the Electoral Act. And we have also made the submissions relating to the registration of political parties. You know, the issue of registration of political parties is governed by the Constitution, but the period within which a political party has to apply for registration is regulated by the Electoral Act. And we are proposing an amendment of Section 78 of the Electoral Act to make it possible for political parties to have a cutoff period within which a political association can apply for registration. And we are saying that a 12-month window is necessary. So that after 12 months to a general election, no new political party will be registered. With this, we do two things. One, give the newly registered political party some time to organize these structures, organize these membership, and also prepare for a general election. And also give the commission enough room and enough elbow to plan for a general election. And we're also proposing the same thing for merger of political parties, that in the case of merger, there should be a window of at least 9 months before a general election. And this will also give us some able room to prepare. But more fundamentally, there are also two other provisions that are germane to elections. And this is Section 78, Section 87 of the Electoral Act, relating to the conduct of party primaries, and Section 31 of the Electoral Act. One, we are insisting that the provision to Section 31 of the Electoral Act, we say that the Commission cannot disqualify or remove the name of any candidate from the ballot for any reason whatsoever, should be expunged, as we believe that it should not be in the law. Secondly, we are also insisting that the political parties can only submit the name of the validly nominated candidate to the commission. And that is the law. And that is what the Supreme Court has decided. But other than that, there is a trend, and we are going to discuss it with the bench. The law, as it is today, is that if a political party has been inputted into the ballot, and that particular political party did not conduct valid party primaries or party primaries known to the law, that if at the end the candidate of that party wins the election, whatever votes that are ascribed to that particular party are weighted votes. But what we have as of today is a situation where some political parties and some aspirants will go to court and ask the court to invalidate the conduct of party primaries or to disqualify a particular candidate. The court will disqualify a candidate and also make a declaration, a determination that the logo of that particular political party should be removed from the ballot. And this puts undue pressure on the electoral management board because ballot papers are printed to currency standard, and it takes time to print the ballot paper. So if a court judgment comes 3 days to an election that we should input back a political party into the system, the implication is that we have to reprint the ballot papers or undermine the election. So, but if ab initio the nomination is invalid, whether the logo of the party is there or whether it's not there, it's immaterial. What is material is that whatever votes are ascribed to that particular political party are invalid, are weighted. So these are some of the recommendations we have made. And we have also said that we do not have the capacity, we do not have the manpower, we do not have the time to really prosecute electoral offender. And that the time has come for us to establish the Electoral Offences Commission and Tribunal to deal with the issue of arrest, investigation and prosecution of electoral offenders. And these are some of the recommendations we have made in relation to the Electoral Act. And we have also made separate recommendations relating to constitutional provisions that have a bearing on the electoral framework. And we believe that if the National Assembly gives due consideration to some of these issues, that we will have a better, a good electoral framework that will stand the test of time.
All right, Mr. Festus Okoye, thank you very much. While you are still with us, I want to bring in Professor Osumbo again to speak to some of the more challenging aspects of our elections, namely what Cynthia was talking about, which is nomination, and which you, Mr. Okoye, also elaborated on. Professor Osumbo, we sometimes label issues of the squabbles around nomination, we label it as matters pertaining to internal democracy of the political parties. A number of the cases that go to court, let's say as pre-election matters, arise from, look, is Cynthia the validly nominated candidate of Party A or Party Y? Some other person will say, no, it was the faction of the party that conducted the primaries. Another will say, no, this was a faction that was recognized. There's a split, and so on and so forth. Can the law deal with this, or should we leave it as an internal party of the, as an internal matter of the parties to resolve? Because each election cycle, you find all of these squabbles, and INEC gets sucked in. It's costly for INEC to defend. It also makes very uncertain who is ultimately a validly elected person. The matter will go right from the Court of First Instance to the Supreme Court when the person has already been sworn in and is sitting in office, and the next thing you heard, no, he wasn't the person validly nominated.
Well, first of all, let me say that I'm quite impressed by the volume and depth of recommendations being made by INEC to the National Assembly. They will go a long way to really improve the integrity of the elections. Coming to the question of internal democracy within political parties, I think that we need to make more progress in this direction. Again, from the historical point of view, until the 2010 Electoral Act, parties were at liberty to submit the names of whichever candidate, more or less. And you found a situation where even when a candidate's name is already with the political party as having been a product of the party primaries, some powerful person simply goes there, strikes out the name, and inserts the name of another person. That was what informed the new provision, which requires that the party primary has to be monitored by INEC, an official of INEC. But what does that amount to? Monitoring. It is just to witness and then sign. And the time has come to go beyond that, to ensure that there's real integrity in the party primary itself. But even the law as it is, we are making progress, even though it's not so obvious, because parties are learning the hard way, if I may put it that way. Political parties that thought they could go get away with this by mishandling the internal nomination process have found that it has been at great cost. Because even when they had celebrated a victory of their candidate, they find that it's just a very transient victory because of the fact that they didn't conduct proper primaries, and their victory is taken from them and given to some other persons. I think that lesson which has been learned, especially in the 2019 general elections, will go a long way to even compel political parties to do what is right. It will be a great tragedy if they repeat these mistakes which cost the political parties dearly. So I think there's room to really improve on this rather than just leave it to the internal affairs of political parties. Because one is not too sure that there's sufficient discipline within the political parties to be able to do what is proper and what is right. So it's necessary for the law to come in to try to force them to obey the dictates of the law and ensure that the process is credible and in accordance with the law and in fairness to the members of the political party. Because all these various people belong to the same political party and they deserve to be treated with treated fairly and equally. So a situation where some other big persons within the political parties place the whole system against some other persons is quite hurtful. And that is why you find that people pursue this up to the Supreme Court, because they feel that they have been badly dealt with and they want to ensure that they get justice. In summary, to the extent that the law can compel political parties to do what is right, I support that. The only tragedy in this, even Barrister Festus Okoye used the expression of wasted votes. I find that very repulsive to the concept of democracy itself. we are watching what is unraveling in the US. In Pennsylvania, for instance, the judge said he will not entertain any suggestion that because some votes were probably improper, therefore, you nullify the votes of other persons. That would be against the very essence of democracy. Votes must count. In Nigeria, votes must count, not as a matter of rhetoric, but as a deep understanding of the fundamentals of democracy. Democracy is about the vote, the right of the people to decide. So we should never tolerate a situation where somebody will say those votes were wasted. So we should fashion a system which ensures that votes are not wasted. That's votes of over 500,000 voters who came out in obedience to the dictates of INEC. INEC and the NGOs and all this have called on people to come and vote, and they troop out. Forget, they don't go to the farms, they don't go to market, they come out to exercise their ballot, and then you say they wasted their votes. It's hurtful, and we must try to devise a system to ensure that we bring an end to that in Nigeria.
And that even speaks volumes about how enthusiastic people can be about their own country and patriotic. Really.
Exactly. And then you say they wasted their votes.
They wasted their votes, really. Cynthia, let's get back to where you stopped.
Yeah.
There are so many things you have in the agenda there on Yaga, and of course, the woman you are, and of course, like so many other women outside there, this agenda cannot be complete without you. And some other class of the society, the underprivileged, the disabled or people with deficiencies, and of course the youths. What's there in stock, all right, from the Yaga point of view? What's in stock for the reform?
So one, we believe if a process is credible and transparent, it opens up the opportunity for women to emerge, for young persons to emerge, and for persons with disability. And that is why there's a lot of push. Can we deploy technology? Can we review the candidate nomination process? Can we reduce the cost of nomination? But beyond that, we also need to start including specific provisions in both the Electoral Act and the Constitution that would guarantee the emergence of women and of young persons. And why is this important? Because if you look at our political history, there is already a history of historic discrimination that has excluded these special groups from participating equally in the parties and in the electoral process. So if we look, for instance, for me, I would always begin with the political parties, the way it is constituted and composed. But why? Because currently, we do not have independent candidacy, meaning for you to contest, you need to be a member of the party. But if parties in their structure and membership and decision-making do not have voices of women and young persons reflected, the policies and conduct of activities would always put women at a disadvantage. And that is why there's a proposal for sections 222 of the Constitution, 223 of the Constitution around political parties to include specific recommendations or rather provisions for political party in their composition of their executive members and their working committees or the national working groups, that there should be specific percentage of women representation. Why is that important? Woman leader is no longer working for us. Youth leader only is no longer working for us. Because most times during elections, the woman leader is just supposed to go mobilize women to come out and vote. Youth leaders are supposed to mobilize youth to come out and vote. But that participation in decisions within the parties is not tangible. But if we have at least 35% women in the executive bodies of political parties and make that in the Constitution, so that parties would then in their Constitution have that level of provision, and also ensure that there is youth representation at that level and inclusion of persons with disability. That would go a long way to regulate how parties are composed. Beyond that is the process on nomination. That now, leaving the Constitution, you would go, okay, I think still on the Constitution. So Uwe's committee did make a proposal on composition of INEC leadership and had said there was a proposal to even review the nomination process of INEC's leadership. That is the chairpersons and the nomination of commissioners and what have you. And a proposal that there should be a chairman and a chairperson and a deputy chairperson in a situation where both will not be from the same gender. And proposal for at least 2, if they have 6 commissioners, at least 2 should be women. So a level of 30% representation or 25% representation, but would always push for 35%. So if we won't go back to Uwe's committee as far back as 2008, there are proposals for women inclusion in the composition of INEC. So if we move to the Electoral Act now, around that section 31 Barrister Festus Okoye mentioned, there's a proposal that provision provides for submission of candidate lists to the Electoral Commission. Now, one of the proposals is, can we look at that section and also make it mandatory for parties in submitting your list? You need to ensure that there is a particular percentage of women in your candidate list submitted to the Electoral Commission, and representation of youth, and at least persons with disability should also be represented there. Now, the idea is, if you make that provision in that section, parties would also be mandated in their primaries to ensure that a percentage of women emerge and young persons are also represented. Then if you move to the sections 87 in the nomination process, now what is the challenge there? In the conduct of primaries, those selected as delegates will usually have low percentage of women. Some parties like the APC and PDP provides for at least women leader at the ward level, local government level to be part of the delegates. But that is not sufficient, because at the end, majority of the delegates are men. So what the proposal is, can we also, in amending that section to include statutory and ad hoc delegates, ensure that at each level we have at least 35% women representation as delegates, that you have at least 30% youth. So and youth can be men and women. So it's because youth, we have young men and young women, and also that's why, if for me, it would focus, if we say 35% women and say that there would be youth representation, it means youth can cut across either. Now that way you also ensure that the delegates that would be voting in an indirect primaries would also have women delegates who can also push their fellow delegates to vote for women aspirants. We're not asking for free tickets for women. No, we're not asking for free nomination for women. We want women to be able to contest equally in a process that can guarantee their emergence without experiencing certain disadvantages in the parties. And I believe that this electoral process, reform process, if it's not gender inclusive and gender sensitive, would not have achieved this aim in promoting democratic development in Nigeria.
All right, Cynthia, very well put. Thank you very much. Back again to Professor Osumbo. Professor Osumbo, there is an issue here on Good Morning Nigeria. I wouldn't know whether we had you as a guest on that occasion. We had discussed the cost of election litigation. Sometimes prosecuting a petition or even defending a petition goes right from either court of first instance, if it's a pre-election matter, or from the tribunal, right up to the Supreme Court. And in recent times, we have seen in some of those petitions or appeals being thrown out because they were frivolous. Excuse me, I have made a suggestion, this is personal, to say that perhaps we ought to have in our laws provision for the payment of a certain amount as deposit by a litigant. If you are sure of your case or you are certain that you have a good cause to proceed, pay this amount into court. If you win, you collect your money. If it is thrown out on account of being frivolous, you forfeit that. One case in point lately had to do with the election in Bayelsa, where I mean, I say this with a great deal of respect to the political parties. A political party that was clearly an outsider in the race now challenged the election of the person who was deemed to have been elected. But in so challenging that he said, look, they were excluded from the ballot. The person challenging didn't meet the age requirement. 34, the age requirement is 35. But the matter was prosecuted right up to the Supreme Court level by way of appeal. Now, if you didn't defend the issue, of course, you know what the consequence would have been. What would be your thoughts on this?
Well, two issues I can understand or glean from what you said. First is you talked about the cost and maybe fees that are paid to election petition lawyers. By the way, election petition is one of the most paying briefs that any lawyer can get in Nigeria these days. Criminal cases, they don't have money to pay lawyers. So if you are lucky you have an election petition, then at least that can pay your bills. So the question is, again, professional ethics of lawyers. Can you just reject a brief from somebody who feels that he has a right, a legal right to ventilate? And then to what extent can you advise your client that, you know, this is not a very good case to pursue to the courts? Sometimes the clients will even say they know, but let them try. They want to try their luck. So that is one side of it. And how much the lawyer charges, again, is a professional matter. It may be that the client is ready to pay any amount that, you know, is prepared to pay so much in order to ventilate his right. And the lawyer would have to take up the case on the instruction of his client. The other issue is access to court, access to justice. And again, it is not impossible to introduce the kind of check that you talked about, a refundable deposit that you pay to court. But people will question that is an impediment. You are placing a financial impediment on somebody's access to justice. And there may be genuine cases of somebody who feels that his rights have been infringed upon and wants to pursue it. It may be a novel case that nobody has ever bothered to take up before, but he feels strongly that he will not sleep over his right and he's prepared. Are you going now to discourage him, say, because probably this type of issue has never arisen before and he's not likely to succeed, and therefore for him to be able to proceed, he must pay X amount of deposit, which may be beyond his financial means? If that does happen, then you are likely to find people arguing that you are placing unnecessary hurdles or burdens in the way of people going to the court to ventilate their right and have access to justice. So it's something that needs to be balanced carefully. But looking at Nigeria as it is today, and coming from, again, our military, the history of military rule in Nigeria, there is this feeling, and again, bodies like Yaga, Cynthia has really been arguing about opening the space to accommodate more people, whether youth or women, and whatever. That is the sentiment, to open up the space rather than trying to constrict it using finance or money as a tool. So I think that for the time being, we should tolerate the situation. But I have a suggestion, which if I were, people have been talking about amendment of the Electoral Act up to declaration of the result of the election. But I always of the view that that is just the first half of the football match. The second half plays out in the courts. And there's very little that has been said about amendment of the Electoral Act or the Constitution with respect to the second half of the game. And you know that one of the dominant issues in discussion nowadays is the role that courts play in election matters. You talked about that. And the fact that people who don't really have a good case, quote and unquote, as you described, feel that so long as they have an opportunity to exploit in the court, let them play the market. I use that expression, that is stock exchange.
That's right.
Play the market, you may be lucky, you get judges who are sympathetic to you. Even though you lost at the polls, you can win in the court. So long as there's a chance of winning election in the courts, you cannot stop people from going to the courts. So we must go back and look at the constitutional provisions that enable courts to declare winners of election. In my view, it is an aberration. Because the Constitution confers on INEC the power to organize, supervise, and conduct elections. It doesn't confer on them the power to declare the result of elections. And I am proposing that part of the Constitution be amended to confer on INEC the power not just to organize, supervise, and conduct, but also to declare the result of the elections to the exclusion of any other person.
How does that work? I mean, Prof, this is probably provocative, but
yeah,
tell us. Explain. Let me. It's a question to you. Conduct.
Yes.
Will conduct not include declaration? Impliedly.
Well, the only is implied in Section 69. It's only the clearest indication to INEC declaring results of election is Section 69 of the Electoral Act and related sections. Yes. But if the Commission is really independent, they organize the election as an independent body, they supervise independently, they conduct independently, why shouldn't they declare the result independently? Why should they share this power with the courts that were not anywhere close to where the elections were conducted? In my view, the power of the courts should end with nullifying the election if there had been non-compliance with the law, or where there were irregularities, or where the candidate was not qualified. They can annul the election and tell the others to go back and conduct the elections. When that happens, you will get rid of wasted votes.
Okay, now, thank you so much.
When the election is repeated, the issue of wasted votes will also be solved.
Nadabo, I know you want to pitch in here.
Yeah.
What Prof is saying, well, now he clarifies it jurisprudentially, that fine, INEC should have the powers from start to finish to declare a winner. Nadabo has won the election for NTA Good Morning Nigeria. The Supreme Court, you go to Cynthia, who is, or the courts now, depending on how you want to write, cannot say, no, Nadabo didn't win, it was Kingsley that won. Yes. Saying that, Prof is saying that Cynthia, as a court, can only declare, they say, look, declaring Nadabo as winner is a nullity. Yes. Go back and reconduct.
Exactly.
That's what you said.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
And that will respect the voters, respect the wishes of the voters. It may be that they don't want to vote for Nadabo, but they don't also know that Nadabo they voted for he wasn't qualified. But they don't want Kingsley. Instead, they want somebody else. So why should the courts nullify the election of Nadabo and declare, yes, whereas the electorate would rather prefer somebody else to Kingsley?
You are in a way saying that INEC should be thoroughly independent in that regard.
INEC should be independent.
Once it organizes, it conducts, it rather has to take the final responsibility.
Exactly. And not people who were not at the scene, who didn't play any role at all in the process.
Right.
That's why I said that's provocative. Cynthia.
Yeah, I mean, I get the sentiments of Prof. Yeah. And because it's what we've seen now is the court is even becoming a coalition officer, counting ballots and declaring. And so the idea from the proposal from Prof is to limit the grounds on which petitions, one, can be brought to court, and then the declaration, the decision of the court should be limited to your either nullifying and not necessarily upholding or declaring a candidate. So if the court's role is limited to what the grounds to, one, here the merits of the case was determined on particular grounds presented before the court, and we specifically highlight those in the law, and then stating that the decisions of the court would be with respect to nullifying or requiring the Electoral Commission to go back and conduct the elections. Now,
nullifying or affirming?
Yeah, no, so nullifying or affirming, yes. Because what we've seen is when the court nullifies, it says it gives the vote to and not to the next candidate or to another candidate or someone who didn't even contest for cases around pre-elections matter. I know sometimes you have pre-elections litigation that at the end of the day the court says the votes are the votes of the party, and then so whoever the court upholds as the rightful candidate for the party, whether the person campaigned or not, would be the winner of the elections.
We saw that in Amici and INEC 2007.
And takes the vote. So, and I think that the evil Prof is proposing that we need to solve to limit the influence of the courts in our electoral process, and also build citizens' confidence in the process, because you also leave voters at a dilemma. I'm voting, but I don't even know what the final outcome would be.
That really points to the fact that there is a very strong relationship between the Electoral Act and then the Constitution, which, of course, in trying to do the other, one has to be touching in order to get through what we really want to get.
Yes.
Yeah, now you're watching Good Morning Nigeria. We shall talk about that relationship between the electoral reform and then the constitution of this country, looking at these issues that were raised and how they can be solved. We shall now take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue with that.
The counsel of our fathers.
I believe we have fought one civil war too many in this country. So those who experience it will run away from it.
Nigerian youths, let's build our nation together.
My name is Nandov Jamda
Muhammad. Stevita Hussein Musa. Goduna Joel Finji. Said Musa John.
I'm a carpenter. I've been doing this for more than 8 years now.
And I said that plantain. Nakai Kimami Shekara Uku.
I've been selling my tomatoes for about 10 years now, and I do it for a better Nigeria.
And I do it for a better Nigeria.
Ina wannan sana'ar lemu ne domin Najeriya ta ci gaba. Ina sa domin Najeriya ta kyau.
And you can see we're doing our small little work to make Nigeria great.
As you can see, I'm a technician and I'm doing it to help myself and to help my generation.
Ina zaune ne a Plateau na business. Kuma ina yin wannan domin ci gaban ƙasar Najeriya.
For a better Nigeria. This message is from the National Orientation Agency.
Hello, madam. Would you like to join us on this mission?
Yes, but how?
Just one question for you. How do you keep your toilet clean?
I use regular detergent and bleach for washing and removing yellow stains. I have been using it for years.
Oh, madam, the regular detergents and bleach are used for washing clothes. To disinfect your toilet properly, you need Harpic 10X. It is specially made for germs and stains remover. Harpic sticker formula settles on stains and gives 10 times better cleaning compared to regular detergent and bleach.
Wow! Now I'm convinced, Helen Paul.
Really?
Yeah.
Now that she's part of the mission, the next house is yours.
Dialogue, empathy, love, and unity. These are vital components of nation building.
For all to be well, we appeal that we should refrain from volatile, provocative, inciting messages and language.
Let's build and not destroy.
All right, you're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria, reaching you live on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We still have our guest with us, Festus Okoye. Of course, the connection to him has been lost, but we thank him for his participation in our program today. We have a number of tweets that have come in from our viewers. We'll take those tweets now. Chris Simeon, I think electronic voting will reposition Nigeria's electoral system, by eliminating or minimizing electoral fraud and manipulation of the results during and after the polls. In this case, reform is inevitable.
Well, Suleiman Babagana says increased budgetary allocation to INEC will help in improving its independence by not only relying on some government agencies for some of its activities.
Suleiman has another tweet there. It says, extending INEC jurisdiction to conduct local government elections will bring sanity and transparency at the grassroots, as state electoral commissions lack the capability to conduct free and fair elections.
Keju Olagboju says the simplest way to reform electoral process to ensure credibility is to tie every vote to a unique BVN number. You can always run an application to detect duplication of names or votes.
Ali Umar Karaye says to provide free and fair election at any level, there must be justification in the screening and employment of electoral staff without vested interest.
And Kunle Onigbinde says the problem is the betrayal of the electorate by our law enforcement agencies. when our law enforcement agencies protect the electorate and the votes that they cast, and not used to rig election in favor of any candidate or party, the electoral laws would work.
Jones Ferrari, introduction of electoral training institutions will help in educating INEC staff, electoral supervisors, and polling unit attendants. Using NYC and hired election workers and supervisors must stop. It gives room for rigging. And by the way, INEC has an institute.
It has, really.
Yes, INEC has an institute. So.
Well, Ibrahim Abdulsalam Bello says electoral reforms are needed as proposed, but much needed is attitudinal change of the people vying for electoral positions and the total reorientation of the voting populace. To get things right, we must make electoral positions less attractive by cutting cost of governance.
Leo Fadaka, the Edo and Ondo governorship elections proved that INEC is capable of transparent and credible polls. Enhancing electronic voting for real-time results will make elections flawless and free of encumbrances. Well, let's be clear about this. Excuse me. Excuse me. There are two issues here: electronic voting and the use of technology for the transmission of results. They don't mean the same thing.
They do not.
Electronic voting is different, and then use of technology to transmit results rather than physically hand carrying it from the polling unit to the collation center. They are two different issues.
They are, of course, and you should know that. Dele Jackson Solomon says strengthening and enforcing the internal party democracy structures that is and campaign finance regulations are critical reforms that would go a long way towards improving the credibility of intra-party and inter-party elections and the illegal use of money in the electoral process, respectively.
Adamo Estefanos. Now, we need self-reformation first before electoral reform. Voters' rights must be respected, thereby making our electoral process more credible and productive.
Although Alpha, as usual, has come in and he's saying that electronic voting will add substance to the whole efforts, thereby carrying many along in this knowledge-based economy and reduce the cost of printing and logistics.
Ahmed Mohammed, I urge INEC to reduce political parties to 2. With that, the risk of many votes being counted as invalid will be reduced, and we make the whole process of the election seamless. We've gone past the stage of INEC about political parties to 2.
Rather having so many now.
Absolutely, yes.
Now, Chris Simeon says electoral reform in Nigeria has been long overdue, and what are we waiting for? He's asking, therefore. Patriotic Nigerians should rise up and pressurize federal government and INEC for pure, clear, and concrete electoral reform before 2023 general election.
Well, let's take Mike Ayakwa. Says we need electoral reforms. That's the way to go. But is INEC truly independent? We must have a body of electors made up of retired presidents, judges, and bureaucrats with the responsibility of appointment of INEC officials. We must think towards electronic voting. This will help in eliminating fraud. Elections should be online real-time. That should be results, I believe. And state electoral commissions should be abolished as the bodies are making a mockery of our democracy.
And Steve Bond is connecting that to electronic voting for people home and abroad. And if an ATM card can be issued in a day, then PVC should be available within 2 to 3 days with ease.
Dele Jack Solomon, electoral reform is a must. The establishment of an electoral offences commission to prosecute electoral offenders, as well as a demand for timely and increased funding of INEC that will enable the commission carry out its responsibilities effectively and transparently.
Okay. Well, some of the issues raised in these tweets, need some clarification and response by our guest here. This talking about maybe the one that came in from Ikeju Olagboju. He said the simplest way to reform the electoral process is to ensure credibility, is to tie every vote to a unique BVN number. And then you can always run an application to detect duplication of names on votes. How would you react to that, Prof?
Well, the permanent voters card, PVC, is supposed to have some electronic things embedded, chip in it, which is the same as ATM card or BVN. Well, talking about this BVN, there's a view that there are too many agencies carrying out this identity, personal identity. You have the national NIMC management, then you have BVN, you have voters card, you have so many that it is possible to harmonize all of this, and you have one card which you can use for all these purposes, rather than have different cards being issued by different bodies. But this is an issue that borders on technology, and as technology gets more and more advanced and affordable, I believe the time will come when we will be able to put all these things in one card and minimize this current method of people carrying so many cards. We know that even in some parts of the world, they're even dispensing with cards completely, with chip. In Sweden, I saw a video of people in Sweden putting a chip on their, the chip, it can open the door, you can withdraw money with it, you don't even need the card anymore. Even with that, you can vote as well. So, although there are some dangers, it may be possible to vote.
Somebody doesn't take you to your ATM or so.
Anyway, technology is advancing at a very fast pace, and you can never tell what is possible in the future. But it's a good suggestion. But the point I would want to bring out, which Kingsley also mentioned, is that when we are saying electronic voting, all of us should be clear in our minds what we are talking about. When we are talking of electronic transmission of results, which is different from the voting in the polling unit itself, that also needs to be understood and what it is all about. I think the transmission, I have my fears about electronic transmission because it is very easy to intercept messages. Electronic messages can be intercepted, manipulated, and doctored. There are experts. You know how easy it is for hackers to hack into systems these days. Even the issue of server. It is easy for some experts to hack into even bank servers. Things as sophisticated as that can be hacked into. So talk less of, say, an INEC server, if there is such a device into which votes can be transmitted electronically. I am not an expert in those areas, but I would expect that those who have expertise in these areas will educate us, enlighten us better as to the safety of some of these devices, hardly any of which is produced in Nigeria. Even the machines we are using are imported. The software, the hardware of these machines are imported. So won't our elections be vulnerable to cyber threats launched from even outside Nigeria, not to talk of cyber threats launched within Nigeria by interested parties? Technology is good. I am not saying we shouldn't go this way, but we must understand very clearly what we are talking about and understand the safety, the weaknesses, and the strengths of these devices that we are talking about.
Well, Prof, that is the way the world is headed now. And I think with every other system that comes electronically, at least there are going to be checks and balances in that regard. There are these cybercrime issues and the way to check them. And there are other issues that come up, which of course technology is trying to devise a means of trying to check those ones too. So the electronic thing, I think, is one thing we can't really escape. As if you give the example of the Sweden.
Electronic what? Voters, voting or transmission?
I mean the process generally, because we're heading towards that.
Because what happened in Edo and Ondo, was that electronic transmission?
Yes, it was electronic.
That was.
Yes.
And Ondo too. That was a good trial they did.
Right?
More of collision. So what happened in, pardon me, Prof.
Yeah,
what happened in Edo and Ondo was the result sheets at the polling units. All they did was to use the ZPad, take a picture and upload on the INEX results platform. Now what that did was anyone can click and see which results were for each polling unit.
Right,
so it wasn't at the polling unit level. Now, INEC was not using that to do any form of collation or transmission. It was more around putting the results out there for citizens to follow through. Now, the transmission was part of what INEC had tried in previous elections like Osun 2018, Ekiti 2018. INEC had tried that, and that was what they did, was to use the smart card reader to transmit the results from the polling unit to an INEC centralized database. And what that did was, at the collation level, each officer at the collation level, while they collate, they will also cross-check with the system to ensure computational accuracy. So the idea for transmission is not to substitute the manual process. No, the idea is electronic transmission would be a complementary role and complementary system to the manual. That way you can always say, this transmission has happened. If there's a problem, what is the manual saying? So the manual will still go on, but it's an additional check to that process. And that is because we also don't want to run into the challenge, the Kenyan experience. You know, they always talk about the experience of the Kenyans' last general elections. So the idea is, let's INEC have the power to transmit results electronically. It makes the process faster, but it does not substitute the manual process, because you also need the paper trail to complement what you have electronically. While the collation is also, it's to help that as you collate, you can easily sum up and you can upload for people to see, for voters or citizens to also follow through that result on an e-platform where they can follow through that. And it's different from e-voting. And my point, or our recommendation on electronic voting is,
before you make the recommendation, what was that Kenya experience you're talking about?
So the challenge was there was e-transmission of results, and the question was, there was no paper trail to confirm some of the results transmitted. If you remember, the court nullified an election, the presidential election. They had to go back and conduct the presidential election again, just based on that challenge of the transmission and the lack of paper trail to confirm some of the numbers or figures that were transmitted. And the idea, or the learnings from that is, in deploying technology, it's always good you have a substitute so that they play complementary roles in that process. And that is one of the proposals we're making. Don't take away the manual process. Still keep that, but introduce technology as a backup.
But we all know that over the years, one of the usual issues we hear about is the so-called bandwagon effect in an election. And so for the lawmakers who will have to deal with the process of either amendment or reenactment of the Electoral Act, there are always concerns. And why do we keep having these concerns? We saw it ahead of the 2019 elections. We have seen it in previous elections. Which election comes first? That's to say, the schedule of elections. Some will say, no, let presidential be the first election. After that one, everybody will just fall in line. Or let House of Assembly election come first, and governorship. After that one, we are not quite sure. Prof, can we get around this? Is it a psychological issue, or is it also a way of gaming the market?
Playing the market. Well, let me just... The short answer is a psychological issue. But to elaborate further, it was this same concern that forced the National Assembly into making the mistake they made in the 2002 Electoral Act. They didn't want bandwagon effect, one direction or the other. But first is that whichever election comes first, there will be bandwagon effect. If you recall, in 1998, when these new political parties were being formed, the military then laid out certain criteria for registration of political parties, that parties that met those thresholds would qualify for registration. And it was tried at the first election was the council elections. PDP did best across the entire length and breadth of Nigeria. Next to it was APC. The bandwagon effect that PDP enjoyed in the council election benefited it, came to its advantage even up to the National Assembly, up to the presidential election. The momentum that was generated from the council election created a bandwagon effect, in my view, that led to the election of a PDP candidate as president in 1999. So whether you start it from the House of Assembly or the Council, or you start it from the if you conduct election and the president of a party wins at the top, is also going to create a bandwagon effect down. That is my view. But at any rate, why should anybody concern himself as to how you cast your vote? Isn't it within your right to decide if you are to flow with the bandwagon?
And
should somebody question?
I'm sorry, Prof. Nadabo.
Yeah.
I'm sure. I don't know whether this obtains in your domain or jurisdiction, but it's a common saying amongst politicians in some states that they want to align with the federal.
And so
you are familiar with this, that they don't want to be in opposition to Abuja, that they should align with the federal. So if the presidency goes to a certain political party overnight, all other particularly the state houses of assembly election, the national assembly election, if those ones have not been conducted, everybody would align with the federal.
Kingsley,
they gave me the market.
Kingsley,
yes.
I just gave you an example how political parties aligned with the party that scored the highest at council elections.
In 98, that's
in
right.
98, it happened. And my question is, at any rate, are you taking up those states who say, let us align with the federal? Have they committed any offense? Is there anything intrinsically wrong for the leadership of a state, the politicians in a state, saying that for the good of our people, let us not play opposition. Let us align because we understand the politics of a developing country. Let us align. Is there anything intrinsically offensive in that?
There wouldn't be anything wrong with that anyway, but the attitude, as you said, that's where the problem is.
Yes.
I remember in 2015, the same thing happened.
Precisely.
And when you say, when the House man says sack in that time, at that time, it was going through, all through. And so the personality at the top and the party too count in that regard. Finally, you are parting thoughts maybe in some 30 seconds.
Okay, I think what I want to say is the challenge with that is because of our faulty federal system. And I hope the next conversation on constitutional review will be conversation around restructuring for a more workable federal system. But I think finally my last parting shot is we're about 816 days to the next general elections. If you go with the ECOWAS protocol elections, we have barely 18, 19 months to actually conclude on electoral reforms before the next general elections, meaning that the National Assembly do not have sufficient time. They need to continue with that process. They resume today. I hope it will be part of the conversation. But even as we go into the next year, the electoral reform is a paramount issue that we should conclude before the next elections. That is the only way we'll be confident in the process. And lastly, any process that does not include women and does not produce a gender-sensitive outcome is not democratic.
I know you won't leave that out. You've gone beyond the time you've given.
Cynthia, thank you very much. When you say restructuring and get more federal system, I'm sure that will respond to that issue, because those who say they want to align with the federal, they are looking at appointments. Yes, so look, federal appointments could be more so lucrative than state appointments. Well, regardless, we'd like to thank you for your incisive comments and analysis of electoral reforms in Nigeria. Cynthia Mbamalu, Director of Programs of Yaga Africa, we appreciate you for being with us today.
Thank you.
We also would like to express our deep thanks to Professor Oserieme Osumbo, former Governor of Edo State, two-term Senator of the Federal Republic, and former Chair of the Nigerian Law Reform Commission. Always a delight having you.
Thank you very much.
Professor Osumbo. Earlier, of course, we had on the program Mr. Festus Okoye, a lawyer and National Commissioner for Information and Voter Education of INEC. He joined us via Zoom from Bayelsa, where, by the way, there's senatorial by-election on the cards. So, on that note, we thank you for being with us. The program returns tomorrow, same time, 7 in the morning. Until then, take care of yourself and be good. I'm Kingsley Osadolon.
And I'm Yusuf Nadabo. Thank you so very much for being part of this program. Thank you.